So welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome to this National Press Foundation webinar. I'm Linda Topping-Streitfeld, the Director of Programs at NPF, and we're talking today about cybersecurity from a consumer perspective. What information do merchants want from us? How do they get it? Should we give it to them? What's the trade-off? In a minute, I'll introduce our guest, but first, for those who aren't familiar with us, the National Press Foundation is a nonprofit. We're based here in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to make good journalists better, and we'll try to further that mission today. If you would like to help support quality journalism, you can go to our website, which is nationalpress.org, and on our homepage, you'll find a button that says Donate. We appreciate it if you use that button. Also, if you're tweeting today, we are at NatPress, and when we introduce our guest, I'll give him a chance to give you his Twitter handle as well. So let me start with that. Joining me today is Adi Kamdar. He's an activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He specializes in patent, free speech, and consumer privacy issues, among other things. He also coordinates the Electronic Frontier Foundation's open access advocacy, and he helps with student activism. So Adi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great presentation today, and maybe we'll start. I know you've got some slides to show us to give us an overview of the topic.
Yeah,
Why don't we go with that?
sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, thank you again for having me. I, as Linda mentioned, do activism at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a civil liberties organization that was founded about 23 years ago. And we deal with issues around digital rights. Now, many of these issues have to do with free speech or privacy when it comes to the government. But one of the more interesting issues, in my personal opinion, is consumer privacy. It's something that affects all of us, and it's something where the legal barriers are a little more up in the air, um, which is why I think it's so interesting. So I want to start by telling a story that I think is actually one of the more telling stories about the state of consumer privacy today. So this was reported on a few years ago in the New York Times um, that Target, well, a few years ago, a man outside Minneapolis went to Target and he was furious. He was extremely angry because in the mail, his daughter had received a coupon book full of discounts for cribs, for baby toys, for baby clothes, and he was confused. His daughter was 16 years old. There's no way that she should be getting these sort of coupons. Um, so he went into the Target. He was furious, and he chatted with the manager. And the manager, wanting to put on a good face, apologized. He apologized again, and a few days later, the manager followed up with the man to apologize one more time. And when he was on the phone, the man stopped him. It turns out he had, in the meantime, had a chat with his daughter, and well, it turns out she actually was pregnant. Now, how did Target know his daughter was pregnant? And perhaps more importantly, what are the implications of a world we live in where companies with massive data sets can accurately predict highly sensitive information about you and me, information that we may not want other people to know? Um, so let's start with the first question, which is how did Target know this Minnesota man's daughter was pregnant? Um, well, it isn't quite that unsurprising. Quite a few companies and organizations these days are gathering more and more information about their customers, their users, their constituents, we live in a world now where data drives quite a bit. A lot of these companies are built around marketing and built around really targeting to their consumers, really providing their consumers as finely tuned of an experience as possible. So they put a lot of effort into marketing, and as of now, what that means is collecting a lot of information about their consumers. Um, so in the case of Target and the pregnant daughter, there were certain shopping habits that tipped off the company. For example, around the beginning of their second trimester, pregnant women buy a lot of unscented lotions. These women buy a lot of supplements as well, scent-free soap, cotton balls. In fact, Target has put together, I believe, a list of about 25 different commonly bought items that allow them to predict with a decent deal of accuracy if you are pregnant or not. And not only if you're pregnant or not, uh, how many months until you're going to have a baby, so they can target different. They can basically target different items at different times.
So
Now,
let me just get this straight for a minute, Adi. What you're
yeah.
saying is that Target looks at specific products that are purchased by women at specific stages of pregnancy and then
Mhm.
uses those purchases to target those women and try to sell them other things that they might be thinking about during that same stage of pregnancy.
Exactly. Um, and how they do this is basically they assign each customer a unique ID. So every time you pay, because you're probably paying with a credit card, your purchases are tied to your name. And Target has a database of everything you've purchased and when you've purchased it. So they know exactly what you're interested in. Now they've used this before to, market tools to certain people or toys to certain other people, or they use this to figure out if you have children, for example. Now, with the case of the daughter's pregnancy, this was something that she had never told Target, nor was she buying explicitly or explicit items that would have tipped off Target or tipped off you and me about the fact that she was pregnant. These were subtle cues, things like unscented lotion or large bags that could potentially fit diapers. And it only takes these subtle things for companies like these to know this sort of information about you. Um, what happens next is then they roll out their coupons. The computer rolls out coupons, and it knows exactly what kind of coupons to give you. What happened initially is that it was targeting these pregnant women and sending them only coupons, like in the case of the Minnesota daughter, um, only coupons for baby items. They realized afterwards that that was a little creepy. How does this company know that, first of all, that I'm pregnant, and second of all, why are they sending me this information to my house where someone else, for example, the girl's father, could find out? Um, and what they ended up doing was they ended up being a little more subtle about it. They put extra coupons for baby items, intermixed with other coupons that you may not care about. So it seems like you are, just a normal shopper, but subtly you get quite a few things that say, oh, hey, you actually are pregnant.
Let me stop you for
I
for
highly,
just 1 minute.
yeah,
When
sure.
I go grocery shopping, I
Hmm.
have a range of items that I typically buy, and I find
Hmm.
that the store sends me coupons for those items, and they
Hmm.
also pop up on my electronic scanner that I use with my customer card at my
Hmm.
supermarket. So I get discounts on things that I buy a lot. To me, that seems like a good thing. Why is it
Hmm.
problematic?
So that's one of the big questions is when it comes to collecting data, a lot of this is about marketing. And And a lot of this is about providing consumers with a more fine-grained experience. So if you are going to a grocery store, or even if you're browsing a website and you see certain ads that seem to be targeted towards you. For example, if I have no interest in traveling soon, or if I have no interest in flower shops or the local, grocery store, I shouldn't get ads for them, right? I should get ads that are targeted towards me. Not everybody feels this way, though, and a lot of people are generally worried about this sort of information. In fact, they're worried that these companies are collecting a lot more information about them than they want, and they have no idea how much of this information these companies are collecting. They don't know the extent to which this collection happens, what the sources of this collection are, and how it's going to be used in the future. And it's this sort of lack of control that causes the most issue. I'm going to get a little bit into how this has been abused in the past. But first, I want to touch upon if companies can do this. Is this legal for companies to do? And the answer is, for the most part, yes. Yes, they can. So when it comes to privacy issues, for the most part, or at least recently, we think about things like the National Security Agency. This is something that has been in the news for a while now, and it's an agency or it's an entity that we as citizens, we as people in this nation have real issues with their collection of our data. This is a governmental agency, and in this case, and in the case of other governmental agencies like the FBI or like the police, you normally are subject to the protection of the Fourth Amendment, which prevents us from being subject to widespread surveillance searches, widespread warrantless searches. Basically, the Fourth Amendment requires that these entities get a warrant before participating or before surveilling us. When it comes to commercial entities, though, this Fourth Amendment protection really isn't there. You don't have any sort of constitutional protection against companies giving you all this information or collecting all this information about you. Now, a lot of times people are volunteering this information. So for example, when they're using something like Facebook, or when they're browsing a website, or when they're going to the grocery store and using their loyalty card, they are giving these companies this information pretty deliberately. Um, but that happens with a certain contract. I mean, it happens with a certain expectation that these companies are going to use this information for internal purposes, and they're going to use this information for the sake of the customer and for the sake of the company itself. The truth is, this information spreads much farther than these actual companies. Um, so these companies, in all practicality, can collect whatever information they want about you. Um, After all, a lot of the information about who you are, where you live, what you do, this information is already public. This information lives in government databases, for example, and is often publicly available. It's just generally hard to find. The rest of this information is derived from commercial interactions, where you shop, the sites you browse, what you buy, and this information is fair game for the companies to get. And it allows them to paint a very vivid picture of you. Now, often this happens internally, so you have some level of expectation of what's going to happen. So for example, if I'm shopping at Target, I may have some expectation that Target is collecting this information about me and is using it to offer specific ads. We may be a little creeped out by that fact, and we may want to know exactly the extent to which these companies are collecting this information about us. But for the most part, there's a certain understanding that we're interacting with this company. They have the right to collect a little bit of information. But often the company that's collecting, storing, and analyzing this information about you isn't the company you're directly dealing with at all. So for example, when you go to the grocery store and you do use a loyalty card, there's a chance that, there's a very good chance that your purchase information is going, um, in addition to the Safeway or the Vons or whatever you're shopping at, it's also going to a vacuum-like company that you haven't heard of. And in the case of most people, will probably never know about. And these companies are called data brokers. So data brokers are entities that are in the information business. Their trade revolves around information on you and me, things like names, addresses, numbers, details about shopping habits, to personal things like, do you own cats? Are you divorced? What sort of a health status are you in? Um, this information comes from generally easily accessible public data, such as data from the phone book, but it also comes from less accessible sources, such as when you use your loyalty card, or even from places like the DMV. So little is it known, the DMV actually, in a lot of states, sells information about who you are, where you live, what sort of car you own to these data brokers. And it's kind of funny. Even the DMV wants to make an extra buck selling this information. Um, Natasha Singer of the New York Times actually has a great article about data brokers, and she described it. If you're an American adult, the odds are that data brokers know everything about you. They know things like your age, your race, your sex, your weight, your height, your marital status, your education level, your politics, what you want to buy, uh, your health worries, your vacation dreams, as she put it, and so on. Um, these data brokers, they make money by selling access to this information. And some companies deal specifically with regulated businesses, um, um, such as helping employers run background checks, for example, or doing things like uh, looking into how trustworthy a future employee is. But other data brokers sell or rent this information for purely marketing purposes. And these data brokers operate on a huge scale. One of the most well-known ones, and if you haven't heard of this one, it kind of goes to show you how slyly these entities operate. One of the most well-known ones is called Axiom. And reports have shown that Axiom uh, has over 1,500 data points per person on over 700 million consumers from around the world. Now, this is huge. This is a scale that is actually kind of absurdly big. And yet they have all this information and they're using it for marketing purposes and beyond. Details about how these sorts of companies, and there are over 250 data brokers. So you may know exactly what data broker you're interacting with on one scale, but you don't know necessarily who they're sharing information with, or which one of these 250 data brokers has your information. Details about where these companies get all their data is still fuzzy. Last year, for example, a handful of members of Congress sent an open letter to a bunch of the biggest data brokers asking them about their business practices. The letter specifically asked the companies to provide a list of each entity, including private sources, government agencies, and offices that has provided data from or about consumers to these companies. And the companies didn't really respond. They gave very vague responses. Axiom, for example, gave a 30-page response where they stated, um, this question calls for Axiom to provide information that would reveal business practices that are a highly competitive nature. Axiom cannot provide a list of each entity that has provided data from or about consumers to us. So basically, they're trying to dodge the answer. They're trying to dodge giving up exactly what companies are giving them this sort of information and how it's being used. Another one of these entities called Data Logics, they announced that they receive this information from 1,400 different sources. 1,400 different stores you shop at, websites you go to, give your information to these data brokers to amass and then resell this information in order for these companies to do things like provide more targeted ads. Um, so Jessica,
Can I stop you for
yeah,
just a
yeah,
minute? Oh, you're looking at Jessica's question because
yeah,
I
I
would love
was,
to know the answer to that as well.
yeah.
Are there tools available so that the average person can see what information a data broker has?
Yes, the answer is yes. There are. In fact, there are a few major tools that a lot of people use that reveal what sort of tracking is happening. So, but the answer is a little more complicated, and I'm going to go into the tools in 1 second. Um,
Sure.
it's complicated because these companies aren't being forthcoming. And right now, the government, for example, is a little worried about that. So the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, recently launched an investigation into data brokers to see what sort of information they gather and how it's being used. One of the commissioners, Julie Brill, she wrote an op-ed demanding transparency around what user data is being collected. And she wants a voluntary campaign called the Reclaim Your Name campaign, where users can know exactly what sort of information is being collected about them. And as Commissioner Brill notes, these companies, they load all this data. It's actually a great quote. They load all this data into sophisticated algorithms that spew out alarmingly personal predictions about our health, financial status, interests, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, politics, and habits. These nuggets of information are subject to very limited protections, which leaves the door wide open for abuse. And consumers have extremely little control. Not only do we not know what sort of information is being collected and whether it's correct or not, but we often have limited means of opting out. And this is the big thing. When you don't know what companies have this sort of information about you, it's hard to say no. It's hard to take control. It's hard to opt out. Some of these data brokers have opt-out mechanisms, but if you have no idea that these exist or that these companies are collecting information about you, how are you going to opt out at all? A lot of people are pushing for tools, whether through a regulatory body like the FTC or through a voluntary program, where you can opt out, where you have a one-stop shop going to a certain site and pressing an opt-out button. But whether this is going to happen in the near future, I don't know. So there are certain ways that these data brokers collect information about you, such as your online activity. So I saw this example actually a few weeks ago, and I thought it was very curious. Well, I guess first of all, let me talk about your social networking sites. Um, uh, Recently, data brokers have been partnering with companies like Facebook and Twitter to deliver better advertisements. So for example, you may see an advertisement for a flower shop on the side of your Facebook feed if you're recently at that flower shop's website. What happens is the flower shop partners with these data brokers. They give them information about what consumers are looking at our website. The data brokers amass this information, add it to your profile, and then they basically send a version of this information to Facebook. Facebook can then target this flower shop ad to you. Facebook returns the favor by telling these data brokers exactly how many times people clicked on this, whether it was actually effective, and so on and so forth. So it's not quite as crazy or evil as it sounds. So for example, Facebook and Twitter and these social networking websites have pushed back against data brokers. They really tried to make sure that this process was as privacy friendly as possible. That being said, this is a lot of information about you that is going back and forth. Um, another example is Twitter. Now, Twitter is a little better about this than Facebook is. Twitter respects this thing called Do Not Track. So, Do Not Track is one of the tools that could help you stop these entities from following you. What it is it's a browser header. So what this means is when you go to your browser, and I think I have a example. Yeah. So when you go to your browser, whether it's Firefox or Chrome, you have a setting that says tell sites that I do not want to be tracked. And what this does is it's basically a switch that you flip on in your browser. Now, when you go to websites, this switch tells them, oh, this user has do not track on. And that's about it. That's about the extent it goes. There's not a lot of teeth to do not track right now. And the entire process around engaging with do not track and around figuring out how exactly companies are going to respond to it has been quite a mess. There's been a bunch of discussions over the last few years trying to figure out, oh, do advertisers have to respond to this? Do marketing agencies have to heed their customers when they say, I don't want to be tracked? And the answer is, well, no, not really, which is kind of a huge ordeal. So when you click this do not track button, it turns out in all practicality, you're not doing a lot. There are certain websites that do follow do not track, and Twitter is one of the biggest examples. When they rolled out their collaboration with data brokers a few months ago, they said, yes, we're collaborating with data brokers, but we're going to give our users the ability to opt out completely. And they can either opt out on our website. If you go to your Twitter settings, there's a way of opting out. Or if you turn on this do not track setting on your browser, Twitter won't collect this sort of information about you. And that's good. That's what we want to see. We want to see companies really respecting their users' rights and their users' sense of privacy, because they want their users, to experience something that's positive. If their users don't want targeted advertisements, they shouldn't need to get them. A lot of users do want these because it does provide a good experience. If you're getting ads about things you actually like, great, that's even better. And if you want that, go for it. Some people don't, though, and I think it's up to companies to really be proactive about letting their users opt out. One idea to make do not track a little more robust was to tie it to legislation. So California actually just passed a bill called AB 370. And what this does is it requires websites to be upfront about how they respond to the do not track setting. So if you look at a website's privacy policy, it basically has to tell you what it does when a consumer has do not track on. Now, there's not a lot of teeth behind this bill. If a customer has do not track on, the website can basically explicitly say, we don't do anything. We recognize that you have do not track, but we don't do anything. Other websites, however, may choose to stop collecting data or collect only certain data about you, or they may promise not to sell this information. So while this bill doesn't have teeth, it does require companies that operate, and these are companies that operate in California, which, if you think about the internet, is essentially every company. It requires these companies to implement a feature where they respond to these sorts of requests, and they recognize that do not track as a setting is enabled. In fact, there's actually a meeting with the Attorney General's office literally right now, a few blocks away from me, trying to figure out how companies should respond to this and how the government should help implement this sort of bill. This do not track setting, while important, doesn't stop all sorts of data collection. A good a good example of this is a lot of websites you go to have these things called tracking cookies or tracking pixels. And what these do is they basically log where you've been going on the internet. When one website puts a tracking pixel or a tracking cookie on your browser, a tracking pixel is usually within the website. Basically, it's a little piece of baggage that you carry from website to website to website, and this cookie relays to a company, a third party. Oh, this person went to the Southwest Airlines site. Oh, then this person went to the you know San Francisco travel agency website, and then this person went to a clothing store looking for sweaters. And all of a sudden, this company knows, oh, hey, this person's probably about to travel, maybe in winter time, well, or maybe any time. It's pretty much always cold in San Francisco, but they want to travel at some point soon. We should target ads toward them that are specific in this way. And one fun example that I actually just found a few weeks ago with one of my colleagues was healthcare.gov. This has been in the news pretty recently, but it turns out that healthcare.gov has quite a few analytics tools that are logging what sort of information or what sort of users are going to this website. And I don't know, I'm assuming many of you are journalists. This is something that I'm really curious about and that I think someone should look into. Uh, maybe I will at some point. But it turns out that a lot of these websites are tracking you, are tracking who you are, when you go to these websites, how often you go to these websites, what you're looking at on these websites, and they're collecting this information in one big pot. Um, now, how do we fight back against this, and what sort of tools do we have at our disposal? Some of these companies have tried voluntary mechanisms, like Axiom has this site that they launched recently called About the Data. Now, this should give you a little pause. I, for one, am pretty skeptical about voluntary mechanisms to opt out of these sorts of schemes. Um, and this site claims to offer transparency, which is quite a diluted term in this case. What happens is if you because you know that Axiom has all this information about you, the idea is you can go to this website aboutthedata.com and see exactly what sort of information they have about you. Um, Now, they won't reveal everything. As reports have shown, Axiom has 1,500 pieces of information about all of us. But it does reveal certain information about you, including what they sell to their partner companies. Um, of course, checking this database in the first place requires entering a lot of information about yourself. So in order for them to cross-check your information with their database, of course they need your full name, and of course they need your street address, and your social security number, and your birthday, and your email address. And this goes to show the sort of information they have about you. Um, if you look at their privacy, it says that this information, quote, may be shared within the Axiom Corporation family of businesses to fulfill a request. Now, you should be wary about entering your personal information and proceed with caution. They require a certain amount of information in order to cross-check it with their own database, but I'm a little skeptical about giving over my social security number and my address in order to see what sort of information they have about me. The funny thing is a lot of users that have used this have found that the information is highly inaccurate. In fact, sometimes it's absurdly inaccurate, saying things like, "Oh, they have kids," or "Oh, they live in a certain state," when that's not exactly true at all. And because of that, a lot of people have thought that this website about the data is essentially a crowdsourced cleaning tool. It's basically saying, oh, check your information to make sure it's correct, and if it's wrong, you can fix it for us. Whether people actually want this or not, That's kind of up to you. Um, I, for example, don't necessarily want Axiom to have information about me at all. So they do have an opt-out mechanism, which you can actually. Wow, I didn't. Well, there you go. That was convenient. Um, I didn't realize I could do that. They do have an opt-out mechanism, and what this does, it doesn't purge your information from Axiom's database, but it should. Um, Tell Axiom that you as a consumer don't want to be targeted for these advertisements. Certain other data brokers have opt-out mechanisms that involve putting a cookie on your browser, an opt-out cookie. Now, what this does is, let's say you find out that this data broker is tracking you. You say, oh, I don't want to be tracked anymore, so you put this opt-out cookie on your browser, and then you engage in basically, common web hygiene, and you clear your cookies. Well, all you've done is you've cleared this opt-out cookie and you've opted back into this advertising scheme. So it's not a perfect solution, and that's why we are really pushing for solutions like do not track. You should be able to say, I don't want to be tracked on a browser level, and basically send this information to websites and say, hey, I am a user who doesn't want to be tracked. Please don't track me. Um, all right, we have a few other questions coming up. Jenny asks, do you need to type in all your information in order to choose the opt-out option? Yes, the answer is yes. I don't know if you can see right now, but on the site, they have those little required fields for each one of these. Um, I think actually, technically, they would probably be able to find information about you without all this sort of added information. But Axiom requires you to enter this sort of information, which, gives me a little pause. Um, and yeah, that's the thing. It is a little weird giving away all this sort of information in order to see what sort of information they have about you. Now, it's too soon to see what sort of effect this sort of mechanism will have, whether more data brokers will allow for opt-outs, whether more data brokers will be transparent about their data, and whether Axiom's efforts will have a sort of domino effect. Self-regulation by the data broker industry really leaves a lot to be desired, and a lot up in the air, especially when a lot of your personal information is at stake. Which is
And
why,
I
groups like the FTC. Yeah,
Well, you were just going to mention the FTC,
yeah.
which relates to my question. You talked earlier about a bill that was passed in California. I
hmm
wonder if there's anything pending at the federal level, because I would certainly think that websites that are doing business in all 50 states would prefer federal regulation, which is obviously going to be more consistent, maybe easier for them to comply with. And
Yeah.
it does seem like the kind of thing under the Commerce Clause that the federal government could do. Is there anything pending?
There's nothing very strong pending right now, and that is a issue. That's why we see a lot of these efforts happening on a state level. In fact, a number of states are pushing for data transparency laws because they realize that something like this is tough to take place on a federal level. It's tough to push through. There's a lot more interests involved, and certain states, one of the other bigger factors is a number of states in their state constitutions, have an explicit right to privacy. So California, for example, in its state constitution, has an explicit right to privacy, which is something that the federal constitution doesn't have in so many words. They have things like the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment that lead to things that are essentially a right to privacy, but it's never so explicit. A lot of these states are using this privacy clause in their constitutions as a basis for pushing these sorts of laws, and as a way of justifying these laws to exist. What we've seen with a lot of internet legislation is, yes, it's sometimes worrisome to have patchwork legislation and to have websites, having to apply to one California law over here and one Minnesota law over here and one Maine law over here. What ends up happening though is it's usually a sort of race to the bottom, or I guess in this case, a race to the top, where they end up becoming the most following the most stringent of privacy regulations across the board. And what it does is it often inspires other states to pass similar laws and sometimes even federal legislation. So another law that California has is called the Shine the Light Law. And basically what this does is it allows consumers to request these companies to tell them, what sort of information they're collecting and how it's being used. Now, this law has a lot of issues, and it was written a while ago, so it needs to be updated, and it's trying to be updated. In fact, the ACLU is pushing for a separate law called the Right to Know Act that would basically require companies like these data brokers or like the websites you go to say what sort of information they're collecting about you and how it's being used, who it's being sold to, and the extent to which your interactions with them is just a marketing interaction. Um, Whether this law is going to pass or not, that's up in the air. There's a lot of stuff to work out, including a lot of interests that are fighting against this. Um, I think the biggest thing for consumers to do is to take matters into their own hands. And a lot of, well, can I hide this? There we go. One thing that they can do is use a technical solution. So I don't know if you remember with the healthcare.gov slide, I was using this tool called Ghostery to say exactly what sort of trackers are following me, and these sorts of tools um, block these sites automatically. So in a world with over 250 data brokers interacting with these websites, you don't know exactly what companies are collecting what information about you. Sometimes you think, oh, hey, I'm going to this website, like in the case of Target, I'm going to Target. They are the ones who are going to be collecting the most information about me. That's not entirely true. A lot of times when you go to a website, there are 15 other sites collecting information about you. And it's up to us to take these matters into our own hands and use these sorts of tools to block these websites. Ghostery is a great example of a tool that does this. There are other tools, for example, there's a tool called Do Not Track Me, um, or even AdBlock Plus.
How does Ghostery work?
So what it does is you install it on your browser. So here's another example. You install it on your browser, and what it does is it will basically any traffic that's going from this website to you, it'll look at. And it has a database of data brokers that it knows about and marketing sites that it knows about. So it knows exactly what sort of trackers these websites are loading, what sort of cookies they're trying to put on your browser, and what sort of tracking pixels, which are basically it's a tiny dot on this website that because it loads, it tells someone that, oh, someone loaded this page, therefore they visited this page. And a lot of times websites have these tiny tracking pixels to know, oh, this person went to site A, then B, then C, then D. So these tools like Ghostery or Do Not Track Me or AdBlock Plus know what sort of websites are collecting information about you, and you tell these tools, okay, I don't want any of these companies to track me, so I want to opt out completely. And it's as simple as basically clicking a button. It's interesting. This is the article that actually tipped me off about the Target story by Kashmir Hill. And it's funny when you go on the Forbes website, you realize that Forbes actually has 17 different tracking sites that are following you, including some of the biggest data brokers like BlueKai. Now, as you notice, some of these tracking sites are things like Facebook. Um, oh, I guess Kashmir used to work at NPF. That's very funny.
Yes, she
I didn't
did.
realize that. Um, some of these, so she must know best. Some of these websites include social media sites. Every time you go to a website with a Facebook button, Facebook is basically alerted. Oh, you went to this website, and then you went to that website, and then you went to this website, and they can refine their own algorithms um, for ads, for targeting ads. All right, Wendy asks, once you delete cookies from your browser, are they really deleted or is it just an illusion? This is a great question. I think we can pretty confidently trust our browsers to delete this sort of information. In fact, Firefox and Chrome and Safari and even Internet Explorer have done a great job over the last few years really beefing up their privacy tools. And doing something like deleting your cache or deleting your cookies does actually delete your cookies. Um, there is another issue though. A lot of websites are going beyond cookies and using what are known as browser fingerprints. So I don't know if you notice in this window right here, I'm on the Forbes website, and I have certain add-ons installed. On my computer, I have certain fonts installed. My screen is a certain size. I'm running a certain operating system. What all this information does is it creates a unique fingerprint about me that is probably different from you, probably different from everybody else using the internet. The fact that I have this unique combination of elements um, creates a unique fingerprint that a lot of websites are tapping into in order to know, oh, this is this user again. We don't have to put a cookie on their browser anymore, or we don't have to specifically track them. All we have to do is recognize their browser again, and now we know this is user X. We can target with them, these sorts of advertisements. That's a little
So
harder to opt out of.
this information, we're not talking about their having an IP address, just this combination of characteristics of the browser.
Exactly. It goes beyond, these what we normally recognize as identifying information like your IP address. Um, and this is why we need a sort of conversation about how we're going to go through the future with these entities like data brokers and with entities collecting much more information about you. When they're able to use these technological means in order to figure out who exactly you are, and when tools like Ghostery or Do Not Track Me go 90% of the way, but can't really block that last 10%. Um, I think that's where something like Do Not Track and something like um, um, either regulations or legislation around how websites need to respond to users' privacy requests becomes even more important. We live in a world where we are interacting with these sort of entities all day, every day. And we don't really want them to collect this sort of information about us because we don't know how it's being used. Now, most of the time it may be used for marketing purposes, but we've seen in the past these data brokers are increasingly interacting with the government. Um, Axiom, for example, was interacting with the government to help identify, I think, half of the hijackers during 9/11. And the FBI regularly uses this one data broker called ChoicePoint that has quite a bit of information about each one of us in order to figure out identities, in order to figure out who exactly is what, in order to connect information that they've collected with marketing information and with information collected from companies. And it's this gray area that causes the most worry.
Now, let me ask you, when you say that these sites are interacting with the government,
Mhm.
is this in response to specific subpoenas, or is this just the FBI or some other government agency coming to a site and saying, we need to know, please help us?
Um, Both, really. For the most part, we actually see the government purchasing this information. They have deals with these data brokers, and they buy this information from them in order to, run these tests. A lot of times, though, what happens is because these websites are collecting a lot of information about you, it's what's known as a honeypot. It's instead of the FBI or the police going to a bunch of different sources to figure out information, and subpoenaing 50 different sources in order to get your information, all they have to do is subpoena one. All they have to do is go to one source because all of a sudden these websites have 1,500 data points about you. That I think that's why this privacy issue is a real issue, and this is why um, we need to be aware about what these websites are collecting and how they're collecting it. When it comes to privacy, I think most people have historically thought about privacy as the right to be left alone, the right to live your own life and not to have people really following along. But I think more and more privacy has become about control. And especially in this day and age where we have a lot of information flowing left and right, and we have a lot of companies collecting a lot of information about us, we have to understand that no longer is it really an expectation to be completely left alone, especially when we want certain services. So the expectation has become uh, how much can we control this sort of flow of information? How do we know exactly what companies are collecting which information about us, and how can we as consumers, take control of this? How can we vote with our feet, or how can we install tools to let us really, grab this sort of data collection by the horns and figure out, yeah, I want this company to have this information about me, but not necessarily that company. And I think that that'll be the big question in the future. What is the extent of privacy in the digital age? How much information is actually flowing across the internet, and what can we as consumers do about it?
Exactly. All good questions.
Yeah. So that's basically the the whirlwind tour of data brokers and how commerce and privacy interact online. Um, as I
I'd like to go back to one point that you made a couple of different times, and that is
yeah.
that the government is actually purchasing our information. You
Hmm.
mentioned the DMV often sells information about us, which
Hmm.
really surprises me quite a bit.
Hmm.
The FTC is somehow uh, trying to regulate this or hasn't yet done anything.
Hmm.
And you just talked about government agencies again going to these sort of honeypot sites and buying our information. That just seems wrong, particularly the DMV, because when I apply for my driver's license, I never expect that information to be for the government to be making a profit on that information.
I think the boat you're in is quite a big one that a lot of people are in. People go to their government sources and or these websites expecting a service or expecting information to be dealt with on one level. Um, the issue is it's not exactly the case, and I think that's why we need things like the shine a light laws or the right to know laws, so we know exactly how these entities or companies or government agencies are dealing with our sort of information.
Mhm. You also talked early on about health information, which
Hmm.
also surprises me because, of course, there's a federal law that guards our health information privacy when we visit a healthcare provider, the HIPAA law.
Yeah, yeah.
How is it that other companies gather health information about us without our actually offering it? How do they find out stuff about our health
Yeah,
information?
this is perhaps the ickiest part of this whole thing. Like you mentioned, there are federal laws that protect health information. There's things like HIPAA, for example. And there are certain laws on the books that prevent this information from spreading around. How these companies have gotten by this in the past is by labeling it as an interest. So they call them health interests. So if you go to a website and you're searching for, you know, diabetes medication, prescription information, or if you're going to a bunch of websites shopping for this sort of um, either information or medicine, um, these sites label you as someone who is interested in diabetes, or as someone who is interested in, in having a child, or interested in X, Y, or Z. And this is their way around that. And I think that's actually really telling. If you go to a lot of these websites, they even use this as a marketing tool where they say, oh, we have a lot of information about customers and consumers to help you market, including things like health interests. I think that's something that people, if they knew more about, would react really strongly to. I think this is something that agencies like the FTC are really looking into because it's an issue.
I guess this is one way that agencies get incorrect information also, because of
Hmm.
course I could be looking for information about diabetes because I'm writing a paper for school or because my cousin has just been diagnosed, any number of reasons. But it would be true that I'm interested in diabetes, just not that I have the disease. And I can see this happening with lots of other topics.
Yeah, and that example actually comes up quite a bit, where people may be browsing for this for research purposes or for journalistic purposes, and all of a sudden they start getting advertisements or they start getting knocks on their door, because they are writing an article about a child pornography ring, or they're writing an article about bond making, or something like that. And that's why I think we should be wary about what sort of information we provide to these websites, what sort of tools we're using when we're using the web, whether it's anonymity tools, or things like Ghostery or Do Not Track Me to help block trackers. Um,
I think Wendy's trying to get at this answer with her last question about
yeah.
it seems like we can no longer expect privacy the way we once could, but what can we do to control the information data brokers share about us or
Mhm.
stop agencies such as the DMV from sharing personal information for a profit?
Um,
You've mentioned a couple of specific tools, but do consumers have any recourse?
So I am of the opinion that consumers do, and this is why I think this is one of the more exciting issues, because I think part of my job is to educate people about this sort of happening. It's something that happens in the shadows, really, and that not many people know about, because these are companies that you're never interacting with directly. And I think consumers can really band together and push for regulations and push for laws. So something like the Right to Know Act that the ACLU and a few other companies or a few other organizations are pushing in California. I think this is something that consumers could really get behind and could really come together and push for. I think it has to happen on two levels. It has to happen on a top-down level, a much more regulatory level, and a bottom-up level. You as a consumer can take certain steps, like using these tools, like going into your browser settings and turning on Do Not Track, or clicking a setting called block third-party cookies. Even doing things like, if you fill out a form on a website, if they don't need your full information, don't give it to them. If they don't need your phone number, don't give it to them. If they don't need your exact personal email address, give them a different one. A lot of websites like Gmail, for example, allow you to do something like add a plus to the end of your email address. So, if my email is Audie, I could do like Audie plus southwest at gmail.com, and it works. There are ways to make the system a little fuzzier and a little harder to track you. Um, but I think for the most part, uh, people can spread the word about this and really educate themselves about the extent to which data brokers exist. There are a bunch of organizations that are working on this sort of issue including the EFF, groups like the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, that are logging information about data brokers, as funny as that sounds, and trying to empower consumers to be able to opt out and to say no.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating discussion today. I really appreciate your being here, Adi Kamdar of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Once again, we are the National Press Foundation. We're going to wrap up now, but we'll ask you to stay on for just a minute. You should see some dialog boxes showing up on your screen. This is our way of having you help us evaluate each of the programs we do, and we'd appreciate it if you could take just a minute to answer some of the questions you see on the screen. I'll also refer you back to our website. That's nationalpress.org. There you can donate to help quality journalism. And you can also see what other upcoming programs we have planned, so you can register for those. Again, thank you for joining us today. Linda Streitfeld from the National Press Foundation. Thanks, Adi.
Thanks for having me.
This was